let's go ahead and get to what I named the show for, Flat Earth, the true light of the world. And the reason that I named it this is for this particular video, and first thing I have to do is give the proper credits to Dan Dimension. This video came out a few weeks back, July 6th, actually. God, only 10 days ago? It seems like it was longer than that. Anyway, so it came out 10 days ago. I saw it, and of course, instantly went gaga over it because I've been talking about this particular model and what's going on for quite some time. In fact, ever since Matrix Decode came out with his video where he was showing the lightning strike at night, and he caught that one frame where during the lightning strike, it literally lit up the entire city, you know, and the sky was blue and everything. And I said at that time that I believed what was happening, because we were talking about Rory Cooper's work, my perspective, about the sun being a single point of light, right? There is no way that the sun being a single point of light could light up the Earth the way that it does. It's just simply not possible. If you think about it, there's going to be all kinds of lighting issues, and actually Rory Cooper, which his channel is down, but I'll put this one in. It's a mirror of it. He covers this very, very well in his video, you know, talking about light shading and you know, points of light and how this all looks. And I think a lot of us can probably get on board with this pretty easy because we've all been inside of a room or whatever with lights on. But the point is that the sun, it's just simply not possible that the sun being a single point of light in the sky could possibly light up the world the way that it is. So I said way back when we were talking about Matrix Decode's video, that what I believed was happening was that when the lightning struck, what it was doing is it was ionizing, it was fluorescing the gases in the upper atmosphere, which in this case would be argon and helium, right? Or neon, excuse me, not helium. Well, helium's up there too, but so lo and behold, Dan Dimension comes along with this, and you know, he's pretty much backing up exactly, you know, what I was thinking, and said at that point, in that when you pass these electric currents through neon gas, argon gas, they will fluoresce in several different colors. And John, I don't think you've seen this yet, but this is absolutely spectacular. It's kind of along the lines of, you've seen the plasma ball, right? You can take a plasma ball and you take a fluorescent light bulb and you get it near it and it lights up the fluorescent bulb. Well, neon specifically has a light spectrum, a color spectrum to it that just happens to match perfectly not only our sky blue, but depending on the angle and intensity of the field that you are passing through it, like we're seeing right here, it will change different colors. It will go from the sky blue to a red and a violet and kind of a yellow color. And all of this depends on, again, the intensity and the proximity, you know, of the gases, the very specific gases. So a lot of people looked at this and they said, well, what the hell does this have to do with flat Earth? And it's like, seriously? Obviously they didn't get it, because what this has to do with flat Earth is that, you know, if these lighter gases, the helium and the argon and hydrogen and everything that's up there, you know, if we were truly right next to a vacuum, those light molecules would essentially be blown off into space, of course, with the rest of our atmosphere. But we'll give the Globers the benefit of the doubt on this one. But these are called the noble gases, okay? And these particular noble gases, which make up a very small percentage of our atmosphere, would be trapped in by the firmament. And again, the flat Earth being an electric circuit, you know, and again, we know the general intensity of 100 volts per meter going up to, you know, 50 kilometers, that's 5 million volts, which is a really high electrostatic voltage potential. And if it's even 100 kilometers, then you're talking, you know, 10 million volts, whatever. But we basically, oops, let me start this over again. We basically have these gases that are up there. And as the sun is going around with, you know, on the flat Earth, it gets in proximity of these gases, and it is throwing an incredibly intense electrostatic charge. right? So it makes sense that as the sun comes in proximity, within several thousand miles, actually, you start getting this light of the neon glowing to a sky blue. And when it's sunrise or sunset, when the sun is furthest away from you, then it is actually lighting those particular gases in such a way where it fluoresces them in purple and yellow and red and the beautiful colors of a sunrise and sunset that we've all seen, right? So this
Right.
is absolutely brilliant, right? I'm looking at this going, this is outstanding that Dan put this together, because this couldn't be a better illustration of, what I was trying to talk about, with matrix decodes lightning strike. And that's exactly it. The lightning strike is doing the same thing. When it strikes, it's in a local proximity, and what it's doing is it is fluorescing these noble gases, and it will literally light up the whole city around you. We've all seen it. We've all seen this happen at nighttime when there's an intense lightning strike. It will literally light it up just like it's daytime, or an instant, just like that, right in the local area. Why?
Yeah.
Because it's the electrical interaction between the noble gases and the intense electrical discharge coming from the lightning strike. So I thought this was absolutely outstanding with what's going on here. So what do you guys think of this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
I think it's perfect. And there's nothing like lightning strikes in Colorado. Those things are ridiculous there.
Yeah, they are.
Well, I know Central Florida is actually the lightning capital of the world, if I'm not mistaken. It's definitely the lightning capital of the U.S., just because there's a lot of lightning over Florida for some reason. And so I grew up in Central Florida, and I've seen some wild, wild, wild lightning there. And yeah, it makes you wonder, because, of course, modern mainstream science does not have any sort of cogent, complete explanation for the phenomenon of thunder and lightning. They've got theories ranging from things to as bizarre as cosmic rays causing lightning, which I think is absurd. But yeah, like when you start to see things like noble gases being or luminescing due to a proximity to a magnetic field, it brings things like the sun, for example, into a different perspective, I think, as well. Because I've thought from the beginning, first of all, I believe it's irrelevant whether the sun and moon or whatever are spherical. So whether the sun and moon are spherical or something else, I think that has nothing to do with the Earth at all. But in terms of the sun, if the sun is some type, because it is an omnidirectional light, but we know through observation that it's a subjective experience. So like you mentioned earlier, if you're walking across the beach near sunset, you'll have that strip of light follow you alone. But everybody else on the beach has that same subjective strip of light, but nobody can see anyone else's strip of light, so it's a subjective thing. And then, like Bob, you just mentioned, when the sun's setting and it's sort of that light is passing through certain layers of gases that cause all those sometimes really pretty and beautiful colors at sunset. It shows that while no, the sun isn't 3 miles high, and no, the sun isn't actually near the horizon, the light waves are actually from the sun are actually passing through those gases at that level. And so you get, of course, what we call the apparent sun. And so the sun itself, though, if we're dealing with, in terms of the Earth itself, on the macro, on the massive level, I mean, we know that it has this magnetic field. We know, or we're pretty sure, that when you get up to the lower magnetosphere, which they claim is about 300 miles, maybe lower, that you have exactly that. You have ionized gases or plasma that form tubes that follow the magnetic field lines north to south. And if the sun itself is, and I hate to use this word, but I'll just use it, if the sun itself is some sort of an electromagnetic ionized gas phenomenon, then it's really, we can't say things like, oh, the sun can't do this or the sun can't do that, because I've seen a lot of flat earthers and a lot of globe earthers, you know, for example, looking at the AE projection, which we all know the problems with the AE projection. It's not a model, it's just a projection, and there's flaws in it. But I've seen even flat earthers like pick apart the AE projection and say things like, the sun can't do this and the sun can't do that. But frankly, we really don't know what the sun can do or can't do, because we don't know what the sun is, and it's obviously that the omnidirectional sunlight is propagating through all sorts of different media that we might not even know the extent to this media, but it's also rendering itself as a specific instance to each observer. And so we can't really triangulate on the sun. We don't know what it's made of. We don't know what it's doing. It may not even be a physical object. And to say that potentially higher dimensional object can or can't do things is just, I mean, it's absurd. You know, it's just absurd.
Right. So now let me put this together for you the rest of the way, because this is the really good part about this. All right. So he goes on and he says, the curve you observe here is in the light, not the earth. Now that may or may not be debatable. I mean, because, you know, we just got done talking about barrel distortion in cameras and stuff like that. However, let's just assume that this is correct, and I'm going to say that it is, and for, you know, the reasons that I stated before, going back to certain types of Faraday effects, which, you know, the Faraday effect in its strictest form would be the kind of the polarization, the rotating type of light field. But another thing that happens is that light will bend with a magnetic field, and we're going to demonstrate that really dramatically, or Dan is going to demonstrate it really dramatically here in just a second. So we're seeing this and along the top, and it's changing colors. Now, what he's going to do is he's going to fluoresce some gas. I think it's a neon in this and then he's going to take a magnet and he's going to put it in proximity of this fluoresced gas, which, you know, has the voltage passing through it just like in our atmosphere. And we have a magnetic field now. And look what the magnetic field is doing. It's bending that fluoresced gas. All right. So now let's put this all together for this. All right. So you guys are very familiar, I'm sure, with this symbol. Okay. The yin and the yang. A lot of people have drawn an analog to it where, you know, say this is the day side, the sun and the moon, right? Okay. But what we're mostly concerned with, I think, is the day side and the sun. Now, what happens is all magnetic fields essentially manifest in this toroidal form. We've talked about this many times before. And in this toroidal form, we have the centrifugal lines of force, which are the ones going to the outside, kind of like the donut area. And then we have the centripetal lines of force, which are the ones that are kind of spiraling down like the water down the drain in a sink, going down the center. All right, so if you took a cross-section of this electromagnetic field, what do you think you would see? You would see this. You would see a pattern. If you took a cross-section, you would actually see a pattern that resembles one side of this, right? Now, let's overlay this idea onto a flat Earth, okay? Now, people talk about, well, flat Earth, it doesn't make any sense because, you know, you would have to have light at one part of the plane and then not light at another part of the plane. So what I'm proposing here, what I'm saying is that because of the magnetic field, the natural magnetic field of the Earth, which we know manifests toroidally, and when we look at it, it's a cross-section, when we take that sunlight, which is fluorescing the sky, okay, and we put it within that magnetic field, then we're going to get somewhat of a light bent pattern going around the plane that resembles this yin-yang. And I think this is really ultimately what this probably means, right? So this would tend to answer a lot. It's like, well, okay, and I'm going to show you another guy's video here, you know, he's complaining about the AE map. It's not possible because Australia would be all the way over here, and if the sun was here and it was just, you know, radiating in a 360-degree curve, then there would be no way that it would be able to illuminate, you know, over here where Australia is. Well, there's a few answers to that, but let's just look at it in this context for a minute. When you apply this type of daylight pattern over the plane, which of course is that fluorescing gas that's lighting up the sky, then this would tend to answer a lot of those things. In other words, I'm saying that the sun is not putting a perfect spotlight on the ground. The light that the sun is putting on the ground is conforming to these noble gases that are illuminating the sky, and this is why we're able to get daylight, in very strange places. So we can't ever look at the light and say that it's not bent, because it has to be, right? So this is basically what I'm saying. And it's also what Dan Dimension is saying in his, that it's the magnetic field that is influencing this Earth, except here we're looking at it, it's just drawing it away. But the natural Earth magnetic field is a toroidal form, and when you look at it in that cross-section, that would give us our sun distribution pattern over the plane. And this is kind of where I'm going with this. What do you guys think about this?
Yeah, to me, it makes perfect sense, and I'll just make a quick analogy and then pass it over to Jaron. But an analogy that I've made a lot is that, and this is just in terms of light, imagine you have a water tower, right? And you poke a hole in the side of that water tower, so you've got an arc of water coming out of the side of it, right? If you were to take, say, a laser and shine it at different angles through that arc of water, eventually you'd get the angle right to where the laser light would travel through that entire arc of water, and the laser beam would hit the ground. And this is just how light travels through different media. And the point that I want to make is that light travels through magnetic fields or lines of force or magnetic matrices just as readily, if not more so, than it does through water. And that's how fiber optics work, and that's how lots of things work. So just wanted to make the point that, yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's going to be the ultimate solution to mapping this thing. Once we get the edges, if we can do away with the Antarctic Treaty, is doing away with the standard magnetic declination stuff, and actually doing this right, and considering a flat Earth, and getting a full geodetic picture of the far south and the far north. So.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's very interesting, and we've been talking about the field being bent in the magnetic field, and of course this is what he says right here. Dan says daylight will take the shape of the electrical and magnetic fields that it is within, and that's absolutely true. I absolutely 100% believe that, and it would be interesting to see if we can come up with an experiment to do it inside of a large container, where we could put a magnet inside of it and then fluoresce the gas and see if it actually kind of fluoresces within a toroidal pattern. I don't believe I've ever seen that experiment done, but I would kind of lay odds that what we would see would be precisely something that lights up very much like this. And like I said, again, when you look at this in a cross section, we're going to come back to this yin-yang pattern. In other words, it's going to have this kind of, tapered and curved pattern back away from the source of the sun, right? Because the sun would be the anode, and the area of highest static electrical potential. So again, that's where the field would be kind of focused around, but we have the static potential that comes off from the Earth itself. So I think this is really magnificent, and I think this really gives us something to work with as far as predicting the light, because I've never believed, not for 1 second, that the old spotlight above the Earth explains everything. In fact, it doesn't explain anything. And when you realize that by simply looking at points of light, how could a single point? It's kind of like the moon. Look at the moon. The moon is a single point of light in the sky, but it doesn't have the static electric potential that the sun does. So it does not fluoresce the sky around it. It is more like kind of a spotlight, right? That's what the moon does. Obviously, it's orders of magnitude dimmer, but that's not the point here. The point is the moon is not emanating this huge electrostatic field like the sun is, and causing these noble gases to fluoresce in the atmosphere. So,
and what do you think about this, Bob? Because see, the conventional explanation is that sunlight scatters in the atmosphere, and that's what causes the blueness. But I've been thinking about it more along the lines, and maybe this is the wrong vernacular, but more along the lines of like a chemical reaction between the sunlight or the invisible, the not visible spectrum radiation coming from the sun that makes contact with our atmosphere. And whether you call it perhaps a chemical reaction, or perhaps even like like you said, the fluorescing of certain noble gases, I guess that is almost a chemical reaction. It's a reaction, maybe a magnetic reaction. But yeah, I agree. I think that the sky fluoresces blue during the day because sunlight is exciting, and there's some reaction between the atmosphere and the sun itself. Now, I don't think this necessarily means that moonlight is not reflected sunlight. I still reserve the possibility that the phases of the moon are in some way related to the position of the moon relative to the sun, according to an observer on Earth. And I still think the moonlight could be reflected sunlight. The moon could be absorbing certain frequencies of radiation and reflecting other frequencies. But frankly, I mean, there's definitely a big difference between sunlight and moonlight, where for some reason the moonlight causes the sky to turn black, I guess you could say, or at least not to fluoresce blue. And what's interesting too is whenever you've got a full moon, the stars seem to be the least bright. And whenever you've got a no moon, the stars seem to be brightest. And so it's almost as if there's some sort of a relationship between the phases of the moon and the luminescence of the stars. I don't know if you guys have looked into that.
Yeah, no, and I understand what you're saying. And the only thing that I can say to that is because the reason that I believe that this is unequivocally an electrical effect is because, again, even in the brightest full moon, right, on the horizon or whatever, you never see any blue sky around it. And of course, the other part of that I think is huge is Matrix Decode's, frame, that beautiful frame that he caught with the lightning strike that illuminated the whole damn city. Again, because this is a proximity charge that's fluorescing these noble gases. The moon doesn't do that. But I do agree with you, John, that there is definitely a correlation between the sunlight and the position of the moon. But like it's kind of like a piece of, I can't remember what that stuff is called, but you know how they have those like kind of like little fluorescent lights where you take them out and you charge them up in the daylight, right? And then you can go in a dark room and they glow, right? That's
Right.
what I think is kind of happening with the sun and the moon. The sun is literally charging something in the moon. And of course, this would presuppose that the moon is a physical object. And I have to admit, I go back and forth on that. I mean, sometimes
Right,
I think,
yeah.
yeah, it's physical, and other times like, yeah, maybe it's not physical. The moon is a tough one for me to figure out. Now, the sun, there's
But
no doubt in my mind.
we don't have to commit. But yeah, the sun for
No.
sure. I don't think.
There's no doubt about it in the sun. The sun is either a projection or reflection or something. There's no
Yeah.
doubt in my mind about that. But yeah, so that's what's happening. I think that and the stars are also doing the same thing. And interestingly enough, when you look into ancient cosmology, the Vedics state the very same thing. The sun is actually receiving its charge for its light from the sun, as are the stars. And there is this energetic exchange between the sun, moon, and the stars, where they're literally kind of acting like this oscillator, where they're kind of exchanging energy back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And causing, because I've also noticed that during certain phases of the moon, the stars will become much more brilliant or much dimmer. And again, this would lend credence to the idea that these bodies are up there actually exchanging charge between them. So anyway, I mean, this is just absolutely magnificent. 100 million kudos to Dan Dimension for actually bringing this video out and showing it, because I think this is going to really fire the imagination of a lot of people, and also some research, and maybe we can develop some other experiments that literally mimic this type of effect. But he pretty much nailed it on this one. Beautiful job, Dan.
Another interesting point that this raises too is that since we now know that there is such thing, or there's most likely, it really appears that there are such things as these tubes of, negatively charged ions or plasma up there, however high, then the Apollo astronauts would have had to gone through that. And I'd like to see some experiments, and I've seen experiments as to what happens when metallic objects with computerized systems and magnetic fields and people come in contact with, you know, high voltage plasma. It ain't pretty. And so I'm really curious to know how NASA planned for the plasma up there when it was only just discovered a couple of years ago, right? So.
Right.
That's what's wrong with Buzz.
And it goes. Oh, go ahead, Jerry.
I said that's what's wrong with Buzz.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
That's what it was.
What's wrong with Buzz? Yeah. Well, you know, this goes back to the whole deal with the ISS. You know, where they supposedly have this cosmic radiation. You know, from the Van Allen radiation belts that's lethal, absolutely lethal, can kill you in nothing flat. And I'm not so sure really if it's so much of a radiation as in like X-rays or something like that, as it may be. I mean, it may be that, or it could also be something as far as like maybe a really high electric potential that, you know, would be so charged that there would literally be discharges all over the place if there was a physical object up there. But assuming that the lethal radiation anyway, which is still a highly energetic EM field, right? If the ISS is floating around up there in this thermosphere, you know, amongst this lethal radiation that is supposedly heating the thermosphere up to 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, then that very same lethal radiation would be heating up the atmosphere inside the ISS to the point where it would also be between 2,500 and 45 degrees Fahrenheit because it has no shielding. Therefore, it's simply impossible that anybody could survive in that. You know, NASA can get away with the excuse of, well, the air molecules are sparse, and that's why, you know, it doesn't get to 4,500 degrees, but they're not sparse inside of the ISS. There is a full-blown, maybe even a full 14.7 pounds per square inch atmosphere inside of that. And it simply would be prohibitive for anybody to be able to exist in that.
Well,
So,
plus it's made of metal also, and you know, this is a point that I think Brian Mullen had brought up, was that you know, the ISS itself is an excellent conductor of heat, and so if it's constantly being pelted, even if it's every now and then with these super heated particles allegedly, then it would slowly but surely accumulate heat, and since it's an enclosed system in a vacuum supposedly, there's really nowhere for that heat to go. Heat has to be transferred or it's stored. And the only way for it to be transferred would be if some cold, you know, particle were to collide with the exterior of it. And allegedly in the thermosphere, you know, they occasionally get cold and occasionally get very super hot particles bouncing into it, and so eventually over time the darn thing should become like an oven because it's constantly being pelted with these superheated particles allegedly, and there's nowhere for that heat energy escape to except for inside of the ISS itself.
right. Yeah, and they say that, you know, the ammonia gas or whatever it is supposedly is their way, but that's just nonsense. I'm sorry, because they have nowhere for that to go. But even all that aside, like I said, you know, NASA can use the excuse about the sparse air molecules outside the ISS, but they can't use it for the inside. And of course, nobody ever addresses that, and they won't, because there is no defense for it. The only way that could be shielded is either by having a whole lot of water around it, because water actually will absorb and also emit, by the way, microwave radiation like that, but it will absorb it. It's fairly effective, I understand, at reducing radiation fields, or you'd have to have 3 feet of lead, which of course is prohibitive, and the rockets would never even be able to lift it. Of course, not they're really going anywhere anyway, but you know, you kind of have to keep this idea of the silly heliocentric model in mind when you think about this. So, yeah. It's just...
Well, and I researched it too, because from what I gather, whatever your opinions are on James Van Allen, history states that he was actually warning NASA prior to the Apollo missions about the Van Allen belts, but NASA basically ignored him, and they did not equip any of the Apollo capsules or whatever with radiation shielding at all. And so, my argument is you could say that that's irresponsible of NASA, but on the other hand, it would be very expensive. And so, they just never planned on going at all. They planned on faking it the entire time. And so I think it was Alan Bean who actually denied, like when he was interviewed by, I think it was Bart Sibrel as well. He denied, he said, oh, we didn't even know about the Van Allen belts when we did the Apollo missions, which that either shows he was lying or it shows that he doesn't know what he's talking about. And frankly, the Apollo astronauts should be the experts on the Apollo missions, right? But in fact, the Van Allen belts had been allegedly discovered prior to the missions, and NASA just categorically ignored Van Allen's warnings to equip their capsules with radiation shielding. They didn't do it.
Talk to the mission director. We were just passengers. Don't talk to me about it.
Right.
Yeah, really. So anyway, yeah, I just wanted to throw it out there. That's why I named the. And one other thing I'll throw in about this, I called it the true light of the world, and I kind of want to go back to word etymology a little bit in talking about this also. We all know essentially what the word El means, right? El could be short for Elohim. It's another word for God, supposedly, right? And correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. But I find it interesting that so many things.
Spanish, it's like the female. I don't know.
No, male.
Male, El, yeah, like El Guapo. But anyway, sorry, go ahead.
El Guapo, right? But it's a precursor like electricity, the elite, elevation. These type of words. But when they talk about El, I mean El is definitely a reference to God. And of course, God or Jesus is also defined as the light of the world, which you could say that would be the sun, but the sun is not the only light of the world. There is more than one type of light. There is the direct light that comes from the sun, and then there is the incidental light that comes from the fluorescing and luminescence of the sky itself. So the true light, electricity, it's all about electricity, baby, and I've been saying that for a long time, and this is really where I think we need to go in looking at this. But the whole thing with the, like I've got showing right here, with the sun and the moon, again, that cross section, you're seeing this cross section, and that is literally what is distributing the light of the sun. It's being trapped, and it's being literally guided around in this type of pattern, and I'm certain this is where this actually comes from. So for your consideration, everybody, I may be absolutely insane, but I've been called worse, but let's consider this. I think it's very viable. So excellent.
Well, honestly, I think anything's possible in terms of what's going on with the celestial bodies, because frankly, it's all up in the air. Even heliocentric proponents, they claim to know what stars are, but it's just conjecture. I mean, anybody to say that we know that stars are made of hot atomic fusion, that's ridiculous. Hot atomic fusion is just theoretical. It's never been demonstrated, and like I've said before, even if you could demonstrate it, there's no way to associate that with the star at all. And so for people to say, oh, the stars are hot atomic fusion and, massive creators of gravity, which is just a theory that's been debunked, it just goes to show that the heliocentric team just believes in dogmatic beliefs, without any direct evidence for them. And so I think that, as flat earth realists, it's better to say, we really aren't sure what's going on with all this stuff, but before we start getting way off into theoretical tangents, let's first all get on the same page. And if anybody can find curvature anywhere, let's see it. And if anybody can find evidence for a spinning spherical Earth, let's see that. And until then, everything else is secondary, right?
Yeah, show me some sort of proof to say where you're getting 25 trillion miles for the closest star, other than just words. They need proof of every single thing that we bring up. But, where's the proof that there's no way you could see 25? You couldn't see 25,000 miles, let alone million, let alone billion, let alone trillion. It's just ridiculous.
2.5 quadrillion miles to Polaris.
Yep.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. 450 light years, right?
Yeah. Which that
Insane.
isn't that far in terms of hypothetical star distances, but it's still pretty far.
It's far.
Yeah, but see, when again, every time I think about that, I always think of the example of, well, if the sun has a diameter of 865,000 miles across, and it's only 8 light minutes away, and in that 8 light minutes, it shrinks down to the size that it is in the sky, then how in the world could anything coming from 450 light years away, like Polaris or any other star out there, even make the trip?
Not even
I mean, it
close.
just doesn't make sense.
It's gravity.
And then with as
Gravity.
many stars as they say there are, that if some of them are showing, then they all should be showing. The whole sky should be whited out.
Yep,
Right.
exactly. So yeah, and of course that's something we've talked about a billion times. But so going back to what I was saying earlier about how this guy, he sent me this several times. I told him I would talk about it a little bit, and basically his whole point in this, it's only a minute and 22 seconds, but what he's saying is that with the layout of the flat Earth the way that it is, if the sun is over here, then there's no way that Australia could possibly experience a 14-hour daylight, right? Well, I see that, and yes, that makes sense. But again, there's a couple things that we have come to conclude about Australia, well, actually about a lot of the continents. Australia, I don't believe, is actually where this particular map shows it is. I would think that it would be more a little bit around this way. In fact, I think Cammy's map is kind of indicating that, as well as some other continental shifts. But say, for the sake of argument, we just move Australia just slightly around to the side a little bit further. Okay.
Sort of following that yin and yang sort of pattern, right? That magnetic
Right.
pattern.
And then
right?
when the sun's over here, you've got this area that's lit over here, and then the tail is kind of sweeping around, catching Australia, right, and any other place for that. When you look at it in that context, and also possibly slightly adjusting the position of Australia, and then you overlay that yin yang map over it, then all of a sudden this is starting to come into focus. It's starting to make a lot more sense. And again, we know that light bends. We know that plasma light bends in a magnetic field. We know the Earth has a magnetic field, and we know that all magnetic fields are toroidal. So this just makes sense.
And did you guys see when you were talking about Dave Sims? Is he a globe believer or he's a square mapper?
I think he's a flat earther, but I mean he's simply trying to make the point here that the reason he titled it this way is because the way that it sits in his explanation and understanding the conventional idea of how the sun and the moon going around with this spotlight kind of thing, that it would be impossible to have this kind of daylight on Australia. But I think that the whole idea of the yin yang kind of bending the light around, and also the very likely possibility that Australia isn't exactly where it's placed on the Gleason's map, combined with several other things, absolutely makes the Gleason map much more viable than people think. But
Yeah,
like
I
I
think
said,
I've seen
there are
people-
some definite continent shift changes.
I've seen some people dropping like flies on that map, and I feel like it's really way too early. I mean, for me, I can make things work. And so, yeah, really with the circular map, I haven't had anybody really bring anything that I thought was, damning to it, to the point where, I mean, there's people coming out with videos and just completely giving up on it, saying it's a Freemasonic hoax, or it's
Right.
it's just not. And I just say be careful on that, because it may be that this whole idea of another map is the hoax. So I mean, and I never tell anybody not to research whatever they're doing, but I mean, if you look back a year and a half ago, there was people telling us to get off the azimuthal and move on, that it was clearly debunked. It was garbage. It was planted there for us, and good thing we've continued on.